Hey everyone, David Aragona here with another edition of the TimeformUS Road to the Derby series. Plenty of Derby prep action this weekend. We've got three 100-point to the winner preps taking place on Saturday. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Fairgrounds prep. It is race 12 on a 15-race card at Fairgrounds, the Grade 2 Louisiana Derby. $1 million is the purse, 100 points to the winner of this race. The distance for the three-year-olds is 1 mile and 3/16. So a real test of stamina for the three-year-olds attempting to secure their berth to the Kentucky Derby starting gate. Brad Cox has entered three runners in this field, topped by the morning line favorite, the number 2 Instant Coffee. He's listed as the fourth-ranked horse on the Derby watch list that Brad Free and I have been compiling throughout this Derby prep season. So a lot of eyes will be on Instant Coffee in this race, but he certainly hasn't scared away any rivals. 12 horses entered in this field to contest the Louisiana Derby on Saturday. Now, I said Brad Cox entered three. Remains to be seen if the number 9 Tappett's Conquest is actually going to run in this race. There have been some reports that he is not a certainty to participate. The fact that Brad Cox named Manny Franco as the jockey, probably a signal that he is a potential scratch because Manny Franco will not be riding at Fairgrounds on Saturday. This horse is also considered possible for the Wood Memorial in 2 weeks' time. So something to keep in mind as you handicap this Louisiana Derby. Before we get to the contenders, let's take a look at some TimeformUS features to help us get a gauge on this race. First up is the pace projector, and you see there's no fast pace or favors on near the lead flag showing up for this race, just a clean pace projector. But given the field size, 12 runners signed on, I might have expected the fast pace flag to be triggered, and it's not here. And I think that says that there really is not that much front running speed signed on in this race. And when you look to the two horses that are shown first and second on the pace projector, you kind of get that sense. Kings Barnes is shown leading the way early. He's not exactly a front runner. He's shown stalking tactics in his two prior races. I think the horse that's going to be on the early lead is the number 11 Jace's Road, who is shown second on the pace projector. He's already a gate to wire stakes winner at Fairgrounds, and given the fact that he's drawn the outside with a rider, Florent Giroux, who can be aggressive at times, I think this Brad Cox trainee will be sent to the front end. The horse that gets that fastest late pace rating flag is the number 7 Cagliostro, something you might want to pay attention to, but typically that's more an angle in races that are expected to feature fast paces. I'm not sure that's going to develop in this Louisiana Derby. Let's move on to take a look at the TimeformUS Finish Projector, one of the new features in the new version of TimeformUS that has launched on DRF.com. You can check out the new TimeformUS desktop PPs by just toggling over to the TimeformUS tab in your DRF Classic and Formulator past performances. And this shows the expected finish of the race based on the TimeformUS algorithm that is rooted in the speed figures and the pace projector. And no surprise to see the three horses with the best speed figures coming into the race shown across the wire, basically sharing that first place spot. So the TimeformUS algorithm seems a little bit confused as to who is going to be the winner of this race. Two of those horses that are shown in that photo finish, the number 7 Cagliostro and the number 10 Dennington, coming out of the exact same race where they earned a very high speed figure that I'll talk about a little bit later in more depth. The number 2 Instant Coffee is that morning line favorite, and no surprise to see him vying for supremacy at the end of this race, but maybe a bit of a surprise that on TimeformUS data, he is not the clear horse to beat in here. It's a very wide open race, and I think this finish projector illustrates that. Let's move into the main contenders, and I'm going to take this field in post-position order so we cover every one of the 12 horses in this race. And we'll begin by taking a look at the last out performance of the number 1 Shopper's Revenge. He is the gray horse all the way on the outside coming to the top of the stretch of this Oak Lawn optional claiming race. And this was his first start against winners for trainer Steve Asmussen, and just the third start of his career. He had won his prior race at Oak Lawn in gate-to-wire fashion, but unable to pull that same trip here because Shopper's Revenge broke pretty slowly out of the starting gate, which forced him to adapt his running style and come from far off the pace. And he did make a good late run to get up for second that day, but was beaten by a horse that some might consider to be a little bit inferior to the competition that he's facing here. He did get a fast pace to close into, but I still thought he put in a good late run, considering the fact that it was a slow start that caused him to be so far behind in the early stages. Given the general lack of pace in this race that I already talked about, I'm interested in that running line two back when he showed such good early speed after a better break from the starting gate to go gate to wire and win that race. I think this is a horse that still does have upside in just the fourth start of his career, but these sons of Tapit, they can be a little bit goofy, and this one has been slow out of the starting gate before, so he's going to have to break alertly from this rail post position to have his best shot. But I do think he's one that you might want to pay attention to if you're doing some price shopping in this race, because he feels like one that could get dismissed at some fair odds. Moving to just to his outside is the number 2, Instant Coffee. Of course, the highly regarded Brad Cox trainee, who is the 2-1 morning line favorite. And this is just a really logical horse in this race. He has not run a bad race so far in his 4-start career. He, of course, lost that Breeders' Futurity in his second career start, finishing 4th, but he lost to horses like Forte, Loggins, Red Route 1, some of the best 3-year-olds that are out there. 2 of them are on our Derby Watch list. So Instant Coffee is clearly one with quality, and he's come back out of that loss to record 2 victories in a row, overcame a slow pace to win the Kentucky Jockey Club 2-back, and then last time out just powered home to win that Lecomte, which has proven to be a pretty strong race. Confidence Game came back to win the Rebel out of it. Dennington, who's also in this race, competed in the Lecomte, came back to win. Obviously, they might have just improved in the overall sense as they gained maturity as 3-year-olds, but Instant Coffee beat them pretty handily that day. He is a horse that lacks early speed. He likes to wind up from the back of the pack and make that big late run. So in a 12-horse field, he probably is going to need a little bit of pace to develop up front if he's going to get that separation to be able to work out a trip from off of the pace. So I do have some reservations about the kind of trip that Instant Coffee might pull in this Louisiana Derby, but I do think he's a horse that will be finishing strongly at the end and will handle this 1 3/16 distance. Moving on to the number 3, Curly Jack. He's coming out of the more recent prep for this Louisiana Derby, the Risen Star. That was his first start off the layoff, his first race since being beaten by Instant Coffee in the Kentucky Jockey Club to close out his 2-year-old campaign when he was a good second that day behind Instant Coffee. The problem is he just didn't run well off the layoff in the Risen Star last time, and maybe he'll use the layoff as an excuse, but it feels like this Louisiana Derby came up even tougher than the Risen Star, so this horse is really going to have to take a step forward and just improve in the overall sense, because he's just a little bit light on speed figures, especially looking at those last 2 compared to some others in this field. So you'll get a better price on Curly Jack this time than you did last time, but he really is going to have to put in a better performance. Another horse coming out of the Risen Star is the number 4, Sun Thunder, and he's actually the top finisher coming out of the Risen Star that is running back in this Louisiana Derby. The winner of that race, Angel of Empire, will be skipping this race for a different Derby prep a little bit later on. Sun Thunder ran pretty well to be second that day, although he did get a great trip to achieve that result. He got some pace ahead of him. You see one of those pace figures color-coded in red, indicating a fast pace to that point in the race. And Sun Thunder just was able to save ground, riding the rail for most of the way, got a path through in the stretch, and actually vied for the lead at the mid-stretch, about the 8th pole, but just got mowed down by Angel of Empire at the very end of that race. And the winner was finishing a little bit more strongly than Sun Thunder as they came across the wire. I do think this horse still has upside. That was only the 4th start of his career last time, and they really threw him to the wolves, first off breaking his maiden 2-back when he competed against the likes of Arabian Night and Red Route 1 in that Southwest. Had shown some potential that day, delivered on the potential last time in the Risen Star, but it remains to be seen if he can achieve the same kind of trip in this Louisiana Derby that he was so successful using last time. Moving on to the number 5, Disarm. We'll take a look at his last race when he was second to 2 Eagles River. Pretty good runner on the Arkansas circuit for trainer Chris Hartman. Disarm was making his first start off a long layoff for Steve Asmussen, finishing second to that foe in this optional claiming race. And He didn't run that fast from a speed figure standpoint, only getting a 96 TimeformUS speed figure for this effort, but he can certainly move forward second off the layoff. This is a horse that they were kind of rushing to get back to the races because he had missed so much time towards the end of his 2-year-old season, but he had shown a lot of ability when he broke his maiden at Saratoga last summer, winning that 7-furlong maiden race against some pretty good horses. Arthur's Ride, who was second, has since come back to break his maiden at Gulfstream with a very fast speed figure. This arm is just going to have to take a big step forward second off the layoff for Steve Asmussen, and also do so while stretching out to 1 mile and 3/16 for the first time. And that's a particularly big ask for a horse that has only tried 2 turns once before, only going 1 mile with his 2 prior races being sprints. So I think there are definitely some hurdles for Disarm to overcome, but he certainly is a horse with upside in this Louisiana Derby. Another one with upside is the number 6, Kings Barnes. We'll take a look at his last race when he was an easy winner of an allowance race at Tampa Bay Downs. He got a good trip, stalking a runoff early leader, reeled that rival in coming around the far turn, and he's going to draw off under some mild encouragement, played a couple taps of the whip there to go clear by over 7 lengths. There really wasn't much behind him this day. He was beating a much, much weaker field than what he'll be facing in this Louisiana Derby, but he did earn a solid speed figure. That 107 TimeformUS speed figure last time out actually stacks up pretty well against a lot of the rivals that he'll be facing here. And the other feather in his cap is that he does have plenty of tactical speed. He showed that in his debut when he was contesting a quicker pace, and then last time when he got that stalking trip behind a fast pace, he can be up close and still finish. And I think that's something that you want to note in a Louisiana Derby where a lot of the contenders are mid-pack or closing runners. Kings Barnes should have that coveted forward position. One potential negative, though, with Kings Barnes is a DRF formulator fact that I found for trainer Todd Pletcher. Todd Pletcher, over the past 5 years, with 3-year-olds that are last out winners, competing in graded stakes on dirt and coming off Lasix. So this applies to a lot of horses on the Derby trail over the past few seasons when they've had to come off Lasix after winning a maiden or allowance race when they could use Lasix. The numbers aren't great. 3 for 22, 14% with a 95 cent ROI, a lot of short prices in this sample. So just something you want to be aware of with Kings Barnes, who is 6-1 in the morning line, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes off at a much shorter price than that, just given the vibe and the hype around this horse. Moving on to the number 7, Cagliostro. He's the one that had that late pace flag on the pace projector. Coming off one of the better speed figures of anybody in this field when he was a narrowly beaten second to today's rival Dennington, getting a 111 TimeformUS speed figure in an allowance race that took place on the Risen Star undercard. That was a race that got a speed figure that just seemed aberrationally high for the top 4 finishers in that race. We have seen one of those come back to compete since then, the 4th place finisher, First Defender, who was somewhat disappointing last weekend at Fairgrounds, finishing 3rd in another allowance race, but his speed figure dropped off a little bit, got a perfect trip and didn't capitalize on it. So just some questions about this horse potentially transferring that form into this tougher graded stake spot. And also, he's a horse that's going to have to come off Lasix after competing on it last time when he achieved that 111 TimeformUS speed figure. So I personally have some questions about Cagliostro. The number 8 is Single Ruler. He's another horse that's coming out of the Risen Star, went off at a big price that day, 42-1, and actually outran his odds to get up for 5th, closing into that fast pace. He was just sort of picking up pieces at the end. He never really looked like a significant threat to the top finishers, got overall a pretty good ride. We'll switch riders to David Cohen taking over the reins here, but he's another horse that is a late runner who's really going to need things to fall apart on the front end, and I'm not really projecting that to happen in this Louisiana Derby, so he will probably have to improve on that most recent effort. The number 10 is Tappett's Conquest, and he's the one that I was saying at the top, or I should say the number 9 is Tappett's Conquest, who is 10-1 in the morning line, getting my numbers confused. He is the horse I was saying at the top of this preview who is uncertain to run in this race with that rider who will not be participating at Fairgrounds on Saturday. Manny Franco named aboard. Brad Cox has mentioned that he could possibly target a different spot, so I'm kind of anticipating he might scratch. of the horses coming out of the Risen Star, I think he actually ran one of the better races, getting a wide trip that day, especially being wide around that far turn before making a nice move into contention and flattening out at the very end of that race. I think he showed some quality that day and in his prior runner-up finish against Allowance Company, but just think he's the kind of horse that will attract plenty of support if he runs here, because he got the kind of trip that a lot of people latched onto last time. So he wasn't really for me if he runs here, but he definitely is one of the win candidates if Brad Cox does choose to allow him to participate. The number 10 is Dennington. He is the other horse coming out of that allowance race along with Cagliostro, and beat that horse by a neck. But like I said with Cagliostro, I have some concerns about the legitimacy of that speed figure that both of them earned. And furthermore, he raced on Lasix last time like Cagliostro did, and he was first time Lasix that day. And Ken McPeak, his trainer, is a trainer who has great stats going first time Lasix and very poor stats with horses coming off Lasix, particularly in stakes races coming off Lasix. Ken McPeak is just 2 for 41 over the past 5 years with a 29-cent ROI. So Dennington is not for me in this Louisiana Derby. To his outside is the number 11, Jace's Road, and I think there's a real case to be made for this horse. I already talked about the pace projector and his positioning there. He's shown second, but I think he's the one that could play out as the controlling speed in this race, and I imagine breaking from this far outside post position that Florent Giroux is going to be intent on sending this horse forward. And the fact that Brad Cox has a deep closer in this race in Instant Coffee, the favorite, you probably want to have horses with complementary running styles running for your barn. And I think if they're going to have the instructions be to send Jace's Road to the lead. Now, this horse earned a speed figure 2 back, a 111, that puts him right in the mix with the top win candidates in this race, earning that number when he was a 5-length winner of the Gun Runner over this fairground circuit. He won that race in gate-to-wire fashion, so you know that he can be successful using front-running tactics. He came back and was disappointing last time in the Southwest, but that was run over a sloppy track, and his other poor effort in his career was also over a sloppy track at Churchill Downs when he was a 2-year-old in the street sense. So maybe he's just a horse that really can't stand up on wet going. So I think Jace's Road getting back on a fast track, if the weather does hold and is sunny at Fairgrounds on Saturday, he figures to be pretty dangerous in this Louisiana Derby as a potential threat to wire the field. One more horse to talk about, that's the number 12, Baseline Beater, and he is the longest shot on the morning line, and rightly so. He's just coming out of a slower maiden victory last time out. That 93 TimeformUS speed figure really not going to cut it against this field. He was a visually impressive winner of that race, and I thought he traveled into the race very nicely and willingly for jockey Corey Lanerie, who retains the mount here. He's just going to have to get significantly faster. He was beaten 2 back by Single Ruler, who was not that competitive in the Risen Star in his next start. So the form lines just aren't really there for Baseline Beater, who will be a big price in this Louisiana Derby. Let's throw out my picks for this race, and I want to do a little bit of price shopping here and go towards the horses that I think are going to offer fair value. Not that the number 2, Instant Coffee, can't win this race. I picked him 4th. I just don't think he's going to offer value if he's around his 2-1 morning line or potentially lower than that. I don't believe he's going to get the right pace set up, and he's just not that likely to win the race in my book. I do like the other Brad Cox trainee, the number 11, Jace's Road. I think he's a real threat to wire this field from his outside post position, especially if there is no rain on Saturday and the track is indeed dry. I think Jace's Road is a pretty likely winner of this race, a much better chance to win than those 12-1 morning line odds would suggest. I also want to use the number 1, Shopper's Revenge, who is another one that is 12-1 on the morning line. I just think this horse has upside, and if he can break from the gate better than last time, he's a horse that could outrun his odds as well in this Louisiana Derby on Saturday at Fairgrounds. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.